Good morning. I'd like to thank you for once again joining us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. Maybe over the last 4 years, you might have noticed that, I have a unique sense of humor, which at times causes me to do some things that are off kilter. Maybe it's because I didn't go to a preacher school, or maybe it's just, because I'm off. But when I was planning out the passages in the series that I wanted us to study together this year, I thought it would be a great idea to begin a series and a look at the book of First Peter the Sunday after our teachers and students go back to school. If you're not familiar with the book of First Peter, it's a letter written to people who are in the midst of suffering, and so I just thought it would fit. It's no secret that our number one struggle with God is the problem of suffering. We tend to have this idea in our mind that if we align with God, then our life should be easy. We should always get the green light, the closest parking spot to the store, or a discount at our favorite restaurant. But the truth is, that's not the truth. Things don't always go our way. Sometimes we get hurt. We get involved in a car wreck. We have emotional struggles or physical pain. Suffering is a huge problem in our broken world. We struggle with frustration, anger, uncertainty, and too often we turn to grumbling and complaining instead of turning to God. Suffering forces us to tell the truth about our spiritual well-being, our spiritual health. Some people rise to the occasion. Other people crumble at the mere thought of more pain and more trial. Suffering is a very real part of life. And I believe First Peter is a beautiful and difficult call for us to press on in our faith. Peter doesn't call us to get up every morning and just kind of trudge through the day, and he doesn't call us to put on a fake smile and ignore our troubles. Peter is calling people of faith to recognize that our current troubles are temporary, and to remind us that you can endure temporary pain if you walk close to God. So we're going to work our way through the words of Peter because I hope that we will find them to be both shocking and surprising. These are the words of somebody who's had their own struggles in life. They know firsthand that everything in this broken world is not, gumdrops, lollipops, unicorns, and rainbows. But Peter also understands that in the midst of our suffering, we can receive the beautiful gifts of mercy and grace. The letter's so much more than just a hymn of comfort. It's a call to action. These are marching orders, fighting words, if you will. And maybe that's exactly what suffering people need to hear. I mean, if you're honest, you would admit that when you're disappointed, discouraged, or hurt, you have this great temptation to turn your focus inward. In the midst of your pain, you become self-focused, self-centered, self-aware. And when that happens, you just add to your own suffering. So Peter offers us a little godly wisdom. He takes suffering people and then he blows them beyond the walls of their suffering and gives them a vision of something that's greater than the things that they're going through, the things they're enduring. He calls them to consider a vision that covers every aspect of their lives. A vision of hope, a vision that provides comfort, that acknowledges that yes, we might be in a time of suffering, but we will endure because suffering doesn't mean that our life is over. So let's look at how Peter begins the letter. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, in the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ, and for the sprinkling with his blood, may grace and peace be multiplied to you. One of the things that I love about the letter is something that I find Peter doing over and over again. He reminds us who we are. You see, one of the side effects of suffering is that we forget who we are. So Peter begins the letter by reminding them, you're the children of God. Even more to the point, he's reminding them that while they are facing all kinds of persecution, they're facing this because they refused to stay in their lane. You see, the letter was written to mixed congregations filled with Jewish and Gentile Christians. They believed that the love of God was greater than the walls that we use to divide us, which in turn caused the keepers of the wall to shame, trouble, and persecute them. These Christians believed in God. They believed in the words of Jesus. They knew that persecution was going to come, but just because I know that in my head doesn't mean that my heart automatically falls in line. You see, believing in Jesus doesn't take away our humanity. These Christians are still searching for a little security, and they really didn't know where they were going to find it. I mean, where do I look for that inner sense of well-being? What provides stability when the world that I'm living in is everything but stable? I mean, we understand their question. Even if we can't fathom their persecution, we know what it's like to search for a little security. And deep down, we know that we're not going to find it in the places that the world tries to find security. I mean, we've all had days when we wondered, how are we going to pay a bill? Or when we're dealing with sickness, or we're having struggles in our family or with our friends. I mean, we each have struggles in our lives, and there are times that we're left wondering, where are we going to find the stability that our souls cry out for? I believe that on the surface, we know the answer to the question. Maybe it's because you're watching a sermon online, but there's a part of us that's really quick to say, oh, security is found in our Savior, Jesus Christ. And the truth is, as soon as we say that, we have a twinge of doubt. I want you to notice what Peter writes here. He says, elect exiles of the dispersion. When Peter calls them exiles or strangers, foreigners, or aliens in the world, he's reminding them of their identity. Maybe another way of saying it is, don't you understand you're not home, you're just a passing through? Have you ever been in a foreign country before? You know, there are a lot of things that we take for granted living in our country. We think everything's supposed to be this way. But when we leave our country, we realize very quickly that things aren't the same. They have different laws, different traditions, different expectations. I mean, the food is different, the living conditions are different. And the country that you're visiting, it might be beautiful. It might have lots of wonderful things for you to see and to experience, but deep down, you know you're not home. As a child of God, you're a stranger living in a strange land. You're living in a culture that doesn't belong to you. And part of your struggle living in this world is that, well, you don't feel like you're at home anymore. This isn't a comfortable place, not like it once was, because now we've been called by God to operate by a different set of rules. Our hearts are motivated by a different set of emotions because we serve a different king. We're no longer comfortable trying to set up our own little kingdom to ourselves because, well, we've been welcomed as a citizen of a better kingdom. And now we have trouble fitting in. You see, we're operating from a different set of standards. We live by a different set of rules. It honestly blows my mind to think that I was chosen to have the blessing of not being in this world. You see, I no longer fit here. We've all been blessed to be a little weird, a little misunderstood. We've been chosen to do things that to normal people make no sense whatsoever because we've been welcomed into the kingdom of God. It's a waste of time for us to try to hide the fact that we're uncommon people living in a common world or to adjust our lives in an effort to fit in more. We've been called to be light, to stand out, to show real Christianity, to love, big love, to be exceptionally different. You see, we've received the transforming grace of God. It's actually a wonderful thing that your heart grieves at places where other people's hearts never grieve, or that your heart rejoices at places where other people's hearts will never rejoice. It's a wonderful thing that what's important to you is different than what's important to people who don't know Christ. All of that is grace. And as I read through the book of 1 Peter, we're going to see grace in every line. But we need to understand that grace is uncomfortable. If we've received the uncomfortable grace of God, if we've truly accepted His grace in our lives, we're not comfortable here anymore. If you've accepted His gift of grace and devoted your life to loving God with 100% of your heart, mind, soul, body, and strength, you understand that it's not easy to be an alien in this world, but it's grace. And grace makes us uncomfortable. I want you to notice that Peter reminds us that we've been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father. I know that's hard to comprehend, this fact, but God decided to love you before he spoke into the world into existence, so you didn't earn his love. You have a Father that knows everything about you. He knows your past, your present. He knows the areas in your life where you struggle. He knows the temptations that you deal with, and he knows the temptations that you really enjoy. And in spite of all that, he knows how much love and mercy you need in your life. It's easy to read the words about God's foreknowledge and just talk about salvation that we're offered at the cross. But I believe that the work of God is progressive, that his love and mercy covers us for our entire lives. And if that's true, then the foreknowledge of God is so much bigger than just what happened at my baptism. His foreknowledge covers my entire life as his child. You see, there's nothing that you can do, nothing you can think, nothing that you can hope for that, well, God doesn't already know about. The things that trouble you, the things that are mysterious to you, the things that are hard for you to understand, God not only knows about those things, God works through those things to fulfill his purpose. I believe God mourns when we experience heartache and suffering. But I think God knows that this isn't the end of our story. This is merely the introduction to the eternity that waits for us. It's important to know that our Father knows, not because it will make everything make sense. We need to believe that God knows because life doesn't make sense. There are moments when we're not going to understand, where it's hard to feel his love, to understand his purpose, moments where it looks like the bad guys are winning. But we can find comfort in the words. We can find peace in the fact that our Father knows. The one who sets the direction of our lives long before we ever take a breath knows. And not only does he know us, he loves us enough to do for us and to provide for us the things that are needful so that we can get home. And we're going to suffer. I'm not saying that our actions don't carry consequences. I think there's a bumper sticker that says sometimes life is hard because we're dumb and we make bad decisions. But that's not always the case. There are times that we suffer because we live in a broken world. Sometimes we suffer to make us more like Christ. Sometimes we suffer because we have to be able to empathize with other broken travelers. You remember back in the Garden of Eden, there was no pain, there was no suffering, no discomfort of any kind until Adam and Eve chose to be their own God. Their choice broke the beautiful gift that God gave to us, and we've broken it 1,000 times over. So while we're here, we endure suffering and pain, but we don't endure it in isolation. We have a Father who sees us, who loves us, who knows us, and a Father that has chosen us for obedience to Jesus Christ. You see, you have not only been offered grace, you've been called to a radical new way of living. When you accept and receive God's grace, you're no longer satisfied to be ruled by your desires or your emotions or your ambition, because you understand that you're no longer the Lord over your own life. You've been called to submit everything that you are, everything that you do, to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. So I want you to get this mustard seed this morning. Pause the video, whatever you have to do, get a pen and paper, write this down. You will never understand God's call to obey until you understand obedience is itself a reward. I think we struggle so much in our relationship with God because we falsely believe if we can get obedience right, then God will reward us with mercy and grace. We think that we have to somehow earn the love of God. When things are going good in life, it's because I got obedience right. When I suffer, it's because I messed up in my obedience. Peter wants us to refocus our understanding of what God has called us to. We were chosen through the work of the Holy Spirit to be obedient to Christ. That's the point. That's the reward. Suffering and reward are not based on our obedience. The reward is our ability to obey God. You see, we're God's children. We've been called chosen to be part of what he's doing on this earth. And we will not see the blessing of obedience until we understand the blessing of being called a child of God and how much grace he constantly pours out in our lives. You see, it's only because of the sprinkling of his blood that we can even approach his throne or gather at the table. It's because Jesus was willing to shed his blood as the payment for our sinfulness that we stand before God righteous. I think we understand that we're still all broken people living in a broken world, still in need of daily forgiveness and cleansing. But as we gather at the table this morning, we gather because no matter how deep our struggle is, no matter how great our failure is, no matter how strong our weakness is, there is continual forgiveness and cleansing. We come to the table to once again join the one who pours out his forgiveness. We don't have to hide in our guilt or cover our shame or run away from God who offers us love and forgiveness and deliverance. Peter writes his letter to remind us we have been chosen to be part of a kingdom that's not of this world. You have been chosen to be part of something bigger than the small confining borders of your worldly kingdom. We've been blessed to submit everything that we are and everything that we have to the lordship of Jesus Christ and to experience the blessing of obedience. But this morning, as we take these emblems, we need to honestly answer, do we live like we believe this? Do we live like this is really our identity? As we make our way to the table this morning, it's my prayer that you will never forget who you are. In the midst of suffering, in the midst of trial, in the midst of tribulation, in the midst of all of the brokenness that this world has to offer, that you, as you gather at the table this morning and you take the bread and you take the cup, you remember that you are a child of God, that you were created for something greater. And after we endure here for just a little while, God calls us home, where we can live with him throughout all eternity. And once we get home, once we see his face, once we get to gather among his loved children, we will understand that all of this was worth it. The suffering and the pain was real, but it was temporary until we could go and be with the one who died so that we could be at heaven with him. I hope you have a wonderful time around the table this morning. Remember that you are deeply loved. Go in peace, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.